Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Ozion called Love Train 2. So I'm in a bit of a funny place with R&B right now, especially the stuff that's more mainstream accessible. Namely that I get the impression that the more sensual acts are due for a subtle shakeup, both in tone and the artists involved. And while I'll wholeheartedly admit a big part of this is me waiting for the inevitable Jhené Aiko breakup album that tears into Big Sean, believe me, I'm looking forward to that. Part of this is linked to how pleasantly surprised I was with Mariah Carey's last album last year, and how indifferent I've been feeling with Ariana Grande recently. Mostly because I'm surprised at the relative lack of competition for her. Last year we got some spicy takes surrounding who the king of R&B is, prompted by Jacquees of all people. Why does it seem like the modern era of queens are ceding the crown to Ariana in the mainstream so damn quickly? And while I could make a bunch of excuses, SZA is between albums, LMA is just starting out and doesn't quite have the pipes, her, Alina Baraz, and Kali Uchis are still underground, Teyana Taylor got screwed by Kanye, Janelle Monáe is too weird and amazing to even really be a part of this conversation, she's kind of transcended it, and I don't even want to get into the mess that is Tinashe's career right now. But the truth is that a lot of major labels are losing money by not really capitalizing on that lack of competition. So I'm stuck going into the underground to find those artists with the chops in order to compete. And early this year, I actually found one. Meet Ozion, a singer-songwriter who also went by the name Aja Bryant, who you might recognize if you dig through the liner notes behind some pretty sizable acts, including even Dr. Dre, but she started coming into her own with the release of the Love Train EP back in 2017. And going back to it now, I'll admit I'm a little bit surprised she didn't get more traction. Thanks to her work behind the scenes, she's racked up a couple Grammy nominations, but more than that, the debut EP is actually really good. I would struggle to call it precisely great. A stunningly subtle voice and solid lyricism can only get you so far if your production and hooks aren't the sharpest, but she had a lot of taste, a lot of potential, and I had a lot of hope for this full-length follow-up. So what did we get out of Love Train 2? Well, honestly, we got a pretty damn solid album. Again, I wouldn't quite call it a great one as of yet, but it's the sort of find that deserves to get Ozion a lot more attention as a songwriter and performer who can really present a compelling narrative over the course of a full project. And while I will make comparisons to a certain other R&B artist with a similar style and timbre to whom Ozion is shy of approaching as of yet, I'd argue Love Train 2 definitely deserves to place her in that larger conversation, because this is a really good album. So yeah, let's get that comparison out of the way first. Let's get it out of the way now. From the vocal timbre to her method of multi-tracking, from the mid-tempo, more atmospheric production to the narrative-driven concept that will carry this album, the comparison to Jhené Aiko is impossible to ignore. And I would be lying if I said that in terms of lyrical nuance and detail, even construction of hooks, or you know what, even just command of her delivery, Ozion is just not quite on that level. But at the same time, I'm not about to complain about a singer who has that sort of timbre and control as someone like Jhené Aiko, and Ozion might be even more willing to embrace the pure sensuality in her delivery, like on the spoken rap third verse of Drip that was really effective. Hell, her more direct language probably makes her even more accessible, or at least shows a singer who is willing to confidently take a more explicit lane with this sort of delivery, which Jhené Aiko doesn't really do. And even though this is not a project that is made for me specifically, I can certainly hear the appeal. She is a fantastic singer. And I might as well talk about that now, which takes us to the larger narrative of this album. A pretty standard breakup, new love arc, with the angle being that Ozion is a lesbian, and that does change the language and emotional approach of the album. Now, this is not an unheard of angle in pop or R&B. Off the top of my head, Kaylee Kiyoko approached similar subject matter on Expectations last year, and honestly, Ozion does it better, because there are some subtle differences that place her in her own lane. Now, for one, she's not one to quickly compromise her integrity, and thus while she is tempted on songs like You, she's not one to cheat, choosing to end things definitively and for good reason on Truth Volume 2, with the acknowledgement that she's really comfortable being on her own regardless, and thus while we do have those moments where some guys will slip into the picture, like on Laid Up, it comes at a moment of weakness on the album where she is missing her old partner. And by the time we get to Belong Volume Volume 2, there is a security in finding a new love that means so much more, and especially as it bookends that opening arc of the album. Now, all that being said, this is a dramatic arc in R&B we've seen done before, and if I were to highlight where Ozion could have expanded the scope of this album, it would probably come in both detail and structure here. Given that songs with a little bit more detail like Drip, Lost in London, Like You, or even The Betrayal that spurns off something new, they're easy highlights of this project. But more to the point, there are songs that can't help but feel a little bit like fragments. I get Belong serving as more of an intro to the longer composition to bookend the album. It does work effectively in that lane, but Laid Up can't help but feel kind of abortive, and the closing track Stuck is barely a coda. A proper conclusion could have really driven this album home more effectively, really summing up the themes, even if there is that level of deeper depth. But I'll be honest, to some extent that's nitpicking for me. I think if we want to talk about the real problem, we need to discuss the production, entirely handled by Cardiac. And I want to choose my words carefully here, because I don't think he's a bad producer by any stretch, and resources might have been limited when putting this album together. But I'm not sure Ozion is always flattered as much as she should be by some of the compositions here. And while I appreciate Cardiac understands her voice is this album's greatest asset by a mile, I'm really not all that much of a fan of the oily layers he tacks onto it with songs like Drip and Nola and Curiosity, where the trap percussion can sound thinner and really cheaper than it should, especially against that guitar backdrop on Drip. But for as much as the album has a good command of its atmosphere, I do think the melodic backdrop could have been a little bit more developed in order to support the vocals. I dig the texture percussion on Something New, but imagine how much more distinctive it could have been if there was some actual tone beyond this faded, warping melodic haze. Same with Games, and to a lesser extent Lost in London with that firmer trap knock. Hell, if I'm being honest, I'm not wild about the majority of the trap beats chosen for this album to begin with, especially when you get the more subtle G-funk inflected melodies and the fizzy percussion on songs like You and Drip, or the chimes accented warbles on Truth Volume 2 and Nola. I mean, the only reason that Lost in London skirts some of that criticism is because it's got that roiling bassy rumble that sounds great. Similar case for Curiosity, with the ticking clock as a note-perfect metaphor of the time limit that Ozion knows is on this hookup with this girl who is exploring her sexuality. But what I'm saying is that the production's got some great subtle touches and it absolutely complements a lot of the atmosphere, but it could afford a little bit more color and variety and flair in order to help this album stand out, or maybe a guest performer or two just to play off her. I think that was a real opportunity. But look, this is the sort of R&B that you can overthink and overanalyze when you don't need to. And indeed, this is a pretty damn solid album to follow up that EP 2 years ago, and it could easily make a solid play for the mainstream if the right songs were positioned correctly. And I will freely admit this is an album that is on the absolute cusp of greatness. The writing's really solid, the delivery is beautiful, and I do like a fair amount of the production and atmosphere as well. If you're looking for more of the progressive vibes, Ozion definitely delivers here. And for me, oh, you know what? It's close to greatness, but I'm going to give this an extremely strong 7 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation, but adding that I think if Ozion continues on this path, she's got a very bright future ahead of her. Again, this is an album that places her in a much bigger conversation, or at least it should, and I would love to see where she goes next. So yeah, this is really good. Check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I'm a little bit surprised there's not more buzz surrounding this album, but yeah, you want to buy and stream it. Links down in the description below, and I got the poll up there. I'm curious for people who have heard this fall on this, and you should all hear this because it's really damn good. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved, hell, in supporting this channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where, hey, I'm still revamping things a little bit, but I appreciate any support that comes in. Beyond that, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.